Welcome to Wrestling Impact, your home for all things wrestling. Please subscribe and click the bell button if you are new to my channel. The recent events involving Liv Morgan and Raquel Rodriguez wasn't just a brawl. It wasn't just two athletes losing their cool. What went down in that corridor was the eruption of months of simmering tension finally boiling over into one of the most chaotic, jaw-dropping backstage confrontations wrestling has seen in a long time. And we have the full story, every single detail, broken down, analyzed, and told the way only Wrestling Impact does it. So if you're not strapped in right now, you better get comfortable, because this one is going to take you on a ride. Let's go back. Let's go back before the brawl, before the chaos, before security was scrambling and production staff were diving out of the way. Because the best stories never start at the explosion. They start at the spark. And trust me, this spark had been burning for a long time. Liv Morgan and Raquel Rodriguez. On the surface, you might think you understand this pairing. You might think you've seen this story before. The fiery, unpredictable Liv Morgan going up against the towering, physically dominant Raquel Rodriguez. But what makes this rivalry so much more layered than anything we've seen recently is that these two women were once in each other's corner. They understood each other. There was a mutual respect there, a professional admiration that you don't see talked about enough. Raquel's size, her power, her relentless ring presence, those are things Liv has openly praised in the past. And Liv's charisma, her ability to connect with a crowd in an instant, her fearlessness against opponents who outweigh her significantly, Raquel has spoken about that with genuine respect. So what happens when two people who respect each other suddenly find themselves on a collision course? What happens when ambition and pride and the pressure of performing at the highest level start cracking the foundation of that respect? What happens is exactly what we witnessed. The mask comes off. The professional courtesy disappears. And what's left underneath? Pure, unfiltered, explosive conflict. The tension didn't appear overnight. It crept in slowly, the way all the best rivalries do. It started with small moments, the kind you almost miss if you're not paying close attention. A post-match stare that lasted a second too long. A comment in an interview that was framed as competitive but carried an edge that anyone paying attention could feel. Raquel Rodriguez is a physical specimen. There are very few people on any roster anywhere in the world who can match her combination of size, athleticism, and in-ring intelligence. When she wants to dominate someone, she does it. And that's exactly what started getting under Liv Morgan's skin. Because here's the thing about Liv Morgan that separates her from a lot of people in this industry. She does not back down. Not from anyone. Not from someone bigger. Not from someone stronger. Not from someone with more experience or more accolades or more physical advantages. Liv Morgan has built her entire career on proving that the underdog can not only survive but thrive. She's the kind of competitor who performs better when she's angry, when she's backed into a corner, when someone has given her a reason to fight beyond just winning a title or getting a paycheck. Give Liv Morgan a personal grievance and you've created something genuinely dangerous. Raquel knew this. On some level, she absolutely knew this. But knowing something intellectually and being able to stop yourself from pushing anyway? That's a different story entirely. Because Raquel's confidence, her absolute belief in her own physical dominance, sometimes that confidence shades into dismissiveness. And there were moments, clearly, where Raquel made Liv feel dismissed. Made her feel like she wasn't being taken seriously. Like the rivalry was already over before it had truly begun. Now imagine being Liv Morgan in that situation. Imagine having someone look through you instead of at you. Imagine being treated like an obstacle instead of a legitimate threat. If you know anything about Liv Morgan's history in this business, you know that is the absolute worst thing you can do to her. That is gasoline. That is a lit match thrown into a powder keg. The brawl didn't start in a ring. It didn't start during a match or a segment in front of cameras positioned for maximum drama. It started backstage, in one of those long, industrial corridors that are always crammed with production equipment, cables running along the floor, monitor carts, catering tables, crew members rushing back and forth trying to keep a show moving. It started in a place that wasn't designed for conflict but somehow always ends up being where the realest confrontations happen. Because when the cameras aren't pointed at you, when you're not thinking about your character or your storyline or how this looks on television, that's when people show you exactly who they are. Witnesses who were backstage described the beginning of it almost like a storm front moving in. You could feel it before it happened. There was a change in the air. People who have been in professional wrestling long enough know what that feels like, that electric, uncomfortable silence before something breaks wide open. Liv and Raquel had apparently crossed paths in that corridor after a segment that had not gone the way either of them had hoped. Tensions from earlier in the night, from earlier in the week honestly, had been building up. And then something was said. Now we don't have word-for-word audio of what was exchanged in those initial moments. But people who were in that corridor have described the energy as immediately confrontational. Not the rehearsed back and forth you see on camera. Real, pointed, personal. The kind of words that come from a place of genuine frustration rather than storytelling. And it escalated so fast that even the people who saw it coming couldn't quite believe how quickly it went from verbal to physical. Liv Morgan, and let this sink in for a second, Liv Morgan, who was giving up significant size and weight to Raquel Rodriguez, did not wait. She did not take a step back. She did not try to create distance or de-escalate or do any of the things that the reasonable, logical part of your brain would tell you to do when you're standing across from someone who is built the way Raquel Rodriguez is built. Instead, Liv stepped forward. And when she did, everything erupted. The brawl moved through that corridor with the kind of chaotic energy that production crews absolutely dread. Equipment got knocked. Crew members who had just been doing their jobs moments earlier suddenly found themselves scrambling sideways trying to get out of the way. The sound of the physical confrontation, the impact, the voices cutting through the noise, it rippled through the backstage area fast. People started running toward it, which is the opposite of what you'd want in that situation, but that's human nature. When something that intense happens, people move toward it. What strikes the people who witnessed it most was how intense Liv Morgan was in those moments. When you watch Liv in the ring, you see fire, you see passion, you see that fearless quality that makes her compelling. But backstage, stripped of the performance element, that intensity was described as something on a completely different level. She was not performing. There was nothing theatrical about what she was doing. This was personal. Raquel, for her part, is not someone who backs down from anything. Her size and strength are genuinely imposing, and she is not the kind of person who simply absorbs conflict. She responded. And for a stretch of time that witnesses described as feeling much longer than it probably actually was, these two women went at each other with everything they had. Security got involved, but not before significant damage had been done to the general calmness of that backstage environment. Several people had to physically step in and create separation. And even when separation was created, it didn't feel settled. It felt interrupted. Like putting a lid on something that was still boiling, knowing the pressure wasn't gone, just temporarily contained. What's fascinating about this situation is the aftermath. Because the aftermath tells you as much about a person as the brawl itself does. Raquel Rodriguez, when the situation was separated and calmed, was reported to have carried herself with that same controlled, physical presence she always projects. But underneath it, people who know her say there was something different. A recognition, maybe, that this had gone somewhere she hadn't fully expected. That Liv Morgan had surprised her in a way that people don't often surprise Raquel Rodriguez. And Liv? Liv Morgan in the aftermath of a brawl like this doesn't look relieved. She doesn't look scared. She doesn't look like someone who is processing what just happened and feeling the adrenaline crash. People who saw her described her as focused. Like the brawl had clarified something for her rather than rattled her. Like she had proven something to herself in those moments that she needed to know. That she wasn't going to be diminished. That she wasn't going to be treated like she didn't matter. And that whatever happened next between her and Raquel Rodriguez, Liv was ready for it. Now let's talk about what this means going forward, because this is where it gets genuinely exciting from a wrestling fan's perspective. Because a rivalry is one thing. A rivalry with this kind of personal, unscripted, emotionally raw backstory attached to it? That's something different. That's the kind of thing that makes matches feel real in a way that the best storytelling in wrestling aims for but doesn't always achieve. When Raquel Rodriguez and Liv Morgan step into any environment together now, whether it's a backstage segment, a contract signing, a face-to-face confrontation, or the ring itself, there is going to be an undercurrent beneath every single moment of it. Every look, every word, every physical exchange is going to carry the weight of that corridor. And that is gold for anyone who loves watching compelling wrestling stories unfold. Think about the physical dynamic here too. Because in wrestling, size mismatches create natural drama. The big versus the small, the power against the speed, the immovable object against the unstoppable force. Raquel Rodriguez is legitimately one of the most physically imposing women in professional wrestling today. Her power moves aren't just visually impressive, they feel meaningful. When Raquel hits something, you believe it. When she lifts someone, it doesn't look like a carefully choreographed feat of strength. It looks like dominance. And Liv Morgan competing against that, throwing herself into battle against someone that physically formidable, that's where her character is most compelling. Because Liv has to be smart. She has to be fast. She has to find windows and exploit them, take risks that other people wouldn't take, absorb punishment and keep going when the logical response would be to stop. Liv Morgan's resilience is not just physical, it's psychological. She keeps fighting when she probably shouldn't because she mentally cannot allow herself to quit. Put those two dynamics together in a proper match context, with all of this backstage brawl history fueling every moment of it, and you potentially have something special. Something that the crowd feels from the first second to the last. Something that people talk about afterward not just because of the athleticism on display but because of the emotion underneath it. The question now is how this plays out. Because both women have too much pride, too much competitive fire, too much of themselves invested in this conflict to let it end in a corridor with security guards pulling them apart. This needs a proper stage. This needs a proper conclusion, or at least the next chapter of a story that clearly has a long way left to run. Raquel Rodriguez is going to want to prove that her physical dominance means what she has always believed it means. That size, strength, and power are advantages that cannot be overcome by heart and willpower alone. She's going to want to prove that in the most definitive way possible. And she's going to want to make Liv Morgan feel small in the process. Not just defeated, but diminished. Liv Morgan, on the other hand, is going to want to prove exactly the opposite. She's going to want to show that all of Raquel's physical advantages mean nothing against someone who refuses to stay down, who fights smarter, who finds a way when there shouldn't be a way. Liv is going to want this personal. She's going to want every moment of their next confrontation to carry the memory of that corridor, of being dismissed, of someone looking through her instead of at her. Those competing motivations, that clash of philosophy and pride, that's the engine of a great wrestling rivalry. And what we have here is an engine that has been running hot for a while now and shows absolutely no signs of cooling down. For all of us watching, for every wrestling fan who lives for this kind of layered, emotionally driven storytelling, this is exactly the kind of situation that makes the sport so compelling. Because we don't just watch Liv Morgan and Raquel Rodriguez as athletes. We watch them as characters in a story that has real stakes. Where winning and losing means something beyond a title or a trophy. Where the personal dimension makes every moment feel charged with consequence. The corridor brawl is not the end of this story. It might not even be the midpoint. It is a turning point. A moment that defines something between these two competitors that is going to shape every interaction they have going forward. And if you're a wrestling fan, if you love watching rivalries that have genuine heat behind them, rivalries where you can feel that the people involved actually mean it, then you need to be paying close attention to everything that comes next between Liv Morgan and Raquel Rodriguez. Because something tells me we haven't seen anything yet. Something tells me the best, most dramatic, most unforgettable moments of this story are still ahead of us. And when they happen, when Liv and Raquel finally settle this in the way that rivals like this need to settle things, it is going to be worth every second of build-up that led to it. That's what makes wrestling beautiful. Not just the athleticism, not just the spectacle, but the stories. The real, human, emotionally complicated stories about pride and respect and what people do when they feel backed into a corner. About what it means to prove yourself to someone who doubted you. About what happens when two incredibly talented, fiercely competitive people decide that this is personal. Liv Morgan and Raquel Rodriguez have given us a story worth following, and Wrestling Impact is going to be here for every single chapter of it. If you felt the energy of this one, if this breakdown got your blood